Alinsky is the biggest influence on Obama. And Alinsky was somebody that and people like me certainly didn't like in the 60s, because the one redeeming feature of the 60s radicals is that we said, we're revolutionaries and we're proud of it. We want to overthrow the government. We want to institute socialism. Whereas the communists before us, the previous generation, usually referred to as the old left, had concealed their agendas. I mean, one of the reasons, are you now or have you ever been a communist, was a question at the time, was because the communists pretended that they were progressives. That's what they call themselves, progressives, and
right.
They, of course, still do. And Jeffersonian Democrats, and no, of course, we don't have any subversive agendas on our plate or agendas to undermine American security in the face of the Soviet threat. What Alinsky recommended as a strategy was precisely to conceal who you are and bore from within. That's the way we used to phrase it, boring from within. You would infiltrate the Democratic Party. My mother, who was a card-carrying communist, was also a card-carrying Democrat. The Communist Party, as part of the what they called the Popular Front, was part of the Democratic Party until 1948, when they broke off and became the Progressive Party, because Democrats in those days were national security Democrats, and Harry Truman opposed Stalin's takeover of East Europe and the descent of the Iron Curtain.
And where does Alinsky fit in?
Alinsky's number one contribution to radicals was to conceal your agendas. And this is what Van Jones actually said of himself, Van Jones being the communist who was appointed to be a White House advisor.
That erstwhile czar.
Yes, the Green Czar. He gave up the cheap rhetoric of revolution for substantive revolution, which you do from within. Alinsky said you have to deal with the situation you have, so you could only make demands that push the envelope. You can't make your ultimate demands. Again, with 60s radicals, we said, we want utopia and we want it now. That was basically
right.
Our demand, and that had the beneficial aspect of that was that you knew who we were and could oppose us. Whereas Obama, as we saw his presidential campaign was a classic case of pretending to be something you're not.
Right.
So you pretend to be a centrist, pragmatic, work with everybody, view government health care as one extreme that's unacceptable and private health care as another extreme that's unacceptable. But that's the way he positioned himself.
And David Horowitz of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, you've done some very important research work on this, both in your newsreel project at the...
we have a blog called Newsreel.
Newsreel blog, and it's newsreel.com?
Newsreelblog.com, but you can access it
through front page.
Yeah, front page.
Okay, frontpagemagazine.com is a fabulous resource on so many different fronts.
I've also written a pamphlet called Barack Obama's Rules for Revolution. Alinsky's book, which eventually was published as Rules for Radicals, was originally called Rules for Revolution. The second really important innovation of Alinsky was this. The socialist left had come a cropper by the 1950s when Alinsky was really getting going, and 60s. The working class wasn't revolutionary, and the revolutions, all the progressive revolutions, were monstrous regimes. They were killing tens of millions of people. They had enslaved whole continents and bankrupted the economies of those continents. So,
and it wasn't possible to conceal that any longer, which was done for many years.
And radicals couldn't agree on the plan anymore. They, And that was part of revealing your agendas. You
Right.
had a certain plan. You were going to take over the means of production.
Right.
So what Alinsky counseled is, don't have a plan. You're at war with what we used to call the establishment. He calls it the haves. Basically, you create a them class, which is, of course, Republicans, Christians, and people who have achieved something in this life and gotten money as a result, and are not on board for your agendas. That's basically it.
Right.
So his advice was, you disrupt things or you undermine them, as, for example, bankrupting the American government, which Obama is now in the process of doing. And then you see what opportunities that creates. The possibility that it would create a hell on earth is never in the radical mindset. And in fact, one of the peculiar things about Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals, is that it's dedicated to Satan as the first rebel.
Yeah.
And whom he says in the dedication achieved his own kingdom. Yeah, hell. I mean, that's something to be proud of.
Yeah, it's something to strive for. David Horowitz, we're gonna pause here just for a moment, but I want to say that the insight that you bring to this in terms of Alinsky's practice and recommendations and the extent to which they are being implemented by the Obama administration is particularly worrying in one specific area, and we want to turn to it next, and that is the conjunction between this leftist agenda and that of the Islamists, the jihadists, those who, in the name of Islam, are seeking our destruction. We'll be talking with David Horowitz about that and a great deal more in just a moment here at Secure Freedom Radio.
Tell us how you really feel. Send an email to radio@securefreedom.org.
You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney.
Welcome back. We have a little more time with David Horowitz, the founder and guiding force behind the marvelous David Horowitz Freedom Center. I wanted to explore with you, more to the point, have you explore with our audience, this tremendous resource that you have created under the auspices of the Freedom Center and at Front Page Magazine, namely Discover the Networks. Tell us about it and tell us what it tells us about the adversaries that we're now facing here inside the United States.
Yes, of all the things that I've done as a political activist, I think Discover the Networks has had the biggest, although it's a silent, impact. 22 or 23 million people have been up there since I put it up 5 years ago. And what it was the map I had in my mind of the left. That is, I understood that all these people who are posing Alinsky-like as peace activists, civil rights workers, environmentalists, are all connected by the radical idea and actually work together and have networks which they organize so that they can bring huge forces to bear on any issue. So I called it Discover the Networks. You can get it at discoverthenetworks.org, .com, .net, doesn't matter. It's a giant search engine with thousands of individuals and organizations in it. And it tells you what each organization, what its overt agendas are, what its real agendas are. I think that the biggest impact we've had is on Glenn Beck. There are a lot of snotty conservatives who look down their noses at the popular culture, forgetting that we live in a democracy, who have attacked Beck unfairly. He's a very, very talented communicator, but I know that his producers go every day up to Discover the Networks, and he is the absolutely first public voice like that, with a significant audience, who has connected the dots, who understands this is an organized movement with an ideology.
Yeah.
He calls it progressivism, which is fine by me, and he has made his show into a school But you know, I'm very gratified and actually have relaxed a lot internally because I feel my work is now spread so far. I mean, I felt like Jonah, you know, who had escaped from the whale to tell people, and nobody was listening for 20 years. And then suddenly, because of Obama, but also because of people like Glenn Beck, people are listening, and they finally understand what we're up against, or at least a certain part of the conservative movement does.
The nexus between the folks from whence you came, these leftists of various stripes with various colorations, with various degrees of transparency about their agenda, on the one hand, and on the other, the transnationalists of a religious stripe, those who believe that the United States must indeed be destroyed, that it must give way to a new global arrangement, but not of a secular kind, not of the left's kind, but of their kind, a theocratic arrangement ruled under Sharia.
I wrote a book about this called Unholy Alliance.
Yes.
Radical Islam and the American Left.
Yes, indeed.
And it's like the Nazi-Soviet pact, in this case the Islamic Nazi Progressive Pact, in which the progressive left would certainly think that blowing up the world, well, not all the progressive left would think blowing up the World Trade Center was just bad PR, but a lot of them, that's the attitude they would take.
At least some, yeah.
You know, suicide bombing is counterproductive.
Right.
The cause is good. It's just counterproductive to blow up little children. That would be their attitude, and they are the greatest enablers of the Islamic Nazis. And of course, anybody familiar with the history of the communist movement and how far it reached into the Democratic Party and the White House during the Roosevelt years should be alerted and alarmed at what's going on in the Obama administration. And unfortunately, went on in the Bush administration before that, though not quite to the extent that is going on now. And by that I mean the major ideological organizational force behind the Islamic Nazi jihad against the West is the Muslim Brotherhood. Right. And the Muslim Brotherhood is everywhere now. You know, of course, if there's some brain-dead leftist listening, he'll say Horowitz is saying there are Islamists under the bed. Well, I do a lot of work on campuses, and on every campus there is a Muslim Students Association, which is an arm of the Muslim Brotherhood and a supporter of the jihad, and is protected and coddled on university administration, so that I, for example, am banned from speaking at a Catholic university, it's called St. Louis University in St. Louis, a 3-day conference of the Muslim Students Association explaining to students why Islam is the perfect religion and how the oppression of women in Islam is a myth, was held at this campus. Whereas
with no controversy or objections from the administration.
I'm banned.
Yeah.
There, but of course,
outrageous.
CARE and Muslim Brotherhood figures are in the White House. One was just named a special envoy to the Obama administration.
Yeah,
but
David.
Wherever you look, you're not seeing Muslims. I mean, there are lots of decent Muslims.
Yeah.
But mainly silent ones.
Well, for fear of being killed if they speak out against what's being done here.
I don't fully think that's an excuse. I mean, I don't ever try to put ordinary people in harm's way, but the fact of the matter is that there's a long history of people standing up to evil, and there is a metastasizing, rampant evil in the Islamic world and the Islamic community, and that puts makes a moral obligation for Muslims who understand this to stand up against it.
Yes.
Otherwise,
I couldn't agree with you more.
What the terrorists and the Muslim Brotherhood do is they pretend that any attack on them is an attack on all Muslims.
Right.
We need good Muslims to stand up and be counted. And recall that there were, of course there were good Germans, but in the end they didn't make a damn's worth of difference.
Right. And really, David Horowitz, that's the point I would make, is that unfortunately you're right, there's a history of people standing up against evil. There's a much longer history of people succumbing to it or acquiescing to it, lest some harm come to them or to their families. And I think it's so striking what you've just said about the Muslim Brotherhood and the fact that its purpose is indistinguishable from those who are seeking, through violent means, our destruction. In fact, the Muslim Brotherhood are perfectly capable of violence when it suits their purposes. It's like the left, though.
Well, they translated Mein Kampf.
Yes.
In the 20s. Their Saeed Qutb, I have to go through all the names, but they created the ideology, which is every terrorist follows. Osama bin Laden learned his version of Islamic radicalism in the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas was created by the Muslim Brotherhood. This is the enemy. And
their mission, they declare, is the destruction of Western civilization from within. We can't say that too often.
Because they want to create a Muslim ummah.
Yeah.
I mean, Islam, as somebody said, the borders of Islam are always bloody because the Koran, this is a problem. I don't say that all Muslims follow every jot and tittle of the Quran, but the Quran is very clear that you have to subordinate infidels and kill them.
Yeah. Well, this is fundamentally Sharia that is requiring that. David Horowitz, we're almost out of time, and I know you're going to have to run, but let me just close with one quick question. It's not a quick answer probably, but do your best. From what you know of how the left operates and what you have charted in your masterful resource, discoverthenetworks.org, what would you say is the likelihood that the penetration of our government by operatives of the Muslim Brotherhood is affecting our understanding of the nature of the danger we face and compromising our ability to defeat it?
Absolutely. I've spoken at 400 universities. The only one I was ever banned at was St. Louis University, and it was because the dean of students, a man named Scott Smith, claimed that I would insinuate that all Muslims are fascists, despite the fact that at every speech I have made, and there's plenty of them on YouTube, one of the first things I say is there are good Muslims and bad Muslims, and I want the good Muslims to stand up. But we had an event at Temple University where we had Geert Wilders, the Dutch politician Geert Wilders is
Yes.
on trial for doing a perfectly truthful film, 15-minute film about with quotes from the Quran and statements by radical Muslim leaders.
Yeah, called fitna.
And the 3 temple administrators tried to shut the event down.
Yeah.
So the answer is that, why did Major Hassan, who killed 13 of our troops, screaming to large audiences, I am a terrorist, I want to kill you because you're infidels, and nobody did anything. In fact, they promoted him from captain to major. How did that happen?
Yeah.
It happened because the fellow travelers, the other part of the Unholy Alliance, the progressives, have so embargoed in this country discussion of the real agendas of the Islamic terrorists and their connection to Islam that there are 13 Americans dead.
Yes.
When are liberals going to be held accountable for the blood they have already caused to be spilled in this country because of their ostrich-like attitudes? That's the best I can say for them.
And we're going to have to leave it at that, David Horowitz. You said it, as always, brilliantly, powerfully, and evocatively, and we thank you for joining us. We thank you for all that you do at the David Horowitz Freedom Center and with your books and your speeches where you're allowed to make them. And thank you. I hope you will come back soon to continue this very important conversation here at Secure Freedom Radio.